Every evening at exactly 5:30 p.m., Eleanor Walker sat on the same wooden bench. No one in town remembered when it started, but everyone noticed that it never stopped. The bench faced a calm lake in Willow Creek Park, where ducks glided slowly across the water and fallen leaves floated like forgotten letters. Eleanor always wore the same light gray coat, buttoned neatly, even when the weather didn't demand it. Her silver hair was tied back in a simple bun, and her hands rested quietly in her lap, hands that once held a lifetime. People assumed she was waiting for someone. They were wrong. Eleanor wasn't waiting. She was remembering. Eleanor was 78 years old, though she didn't feel old. She felt full of years, of moments, of words said and unsaid. And beside her on the bench, though no one else could see it, sat her husband, Henry Walker. Henry had died 3 years ago, but Eleanor still made room for him. Henry used to say, "If you sit somewhere long enough, life will eventually come sit beside you." So Eleanor sat. She sat because this was where Henry had asked her to marry him. Awkwardly, nervously, with a trembling hand and a ring too small for her finger. She sat because this was where they had argued once, loudly, over nothing important. She sat because this was where he had apologized without words, by simply holding her hand until the sun went down.
And now, she sat because memories needed a place to rest. Eleanor remembered the early years, the tiny apartment, the chipped coffee mugs, the way Henry used to hum while fixing things he barely understood. They didn't have much money, but they had something better: time. Time to talk. Time to listen. Time to forgive. Or so they thought. As years passed, time became expensive. Henry worked longer hours. Eleanor learned to eat dinner alone. Conversations turned into schedules. Apologies were replaced by silence. Love didn't disappear. It just waited quietly in corners, hoping to be noticed again. They were never unkind to each other. That was the saddest part. They were simply busy. One autumn evening, much like this one, Eleanor had suggested they come to the park. Henry had sighed. "Tomorrow," he said. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next year. And then tomorrow never came. Henry's heart attack happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No warning. No dramatic final words. Just a phone call that shattered everything Eleanor thought she had time for. At the funeral, people said, "At least you had many years together." Eleanor smiled politely. What she wanted to say was, "We had many years, but not enough moments." Now, as she sat on the bench, Eleanor spoke softly to the empty air. "You would have loved the ducks today," she whispered. "They're as stubborn as you were." The wind moved the leaves, and for a moment, she imagined Henry laughing. A young man passed by with his phone in his hand, barely looking up. A couple argued quietly near the water. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, begging for attention. Eleanor watched them all. She wanted to stop them, to tell them something important. But lessons are only learned when someone is ready to hear them. As the sun began to set, Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, worn thin from being unfolded and refolded hundreds of times. Henry had written it years ago. A simple note he never knew she kept. "If I ever forget to tell you I love you, remind me by sitting beside me." Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from understanding. Love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about presence, about choosing to sit down when life tells you to rush. Eleanor placed the note back in her pocket and patted the empty space beside her. "Thank you for sitting with me," she said. The sky turned amber. The park lights flickered on. And Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt since Henry died. Peace. When she finally stood up to leave, the bench remained quiet, patient, waiting for the next story. Because some lessons don't shout. They sit quietly, hoping someone will notice.